This week on World Traveler Cooking, you've seen my Zeppelini videos, but did you know that Zeppelini is part of a larger Northern and Eastern European tradition of potato dumplings? Well, today we're going to make Pitepalt from Norrebotton. Norrebotton is the northernmost part of Sweden, and Pitepalt is one of the dishes they eat there. This is a typical potato dumpling from this area. Very much like Zeppelini, it uses squeezed potato pulp and starch as the primary source of the dough. Unlike Zeppelini, that starch comes from wheat flour, and it does not use any cooked potatoes. So this is a slightly different dish. The dough is going to come out a little differently, and we will boil it for a lot longer. Now, pitapalt is a fairly heavy dish, so I'm not going to make so much of it. Most of the recipes you'll find start off with a kilogram of potatoes, so I'm starting with half that. And basically, we have potatoes, some sort of cereal flour, typically barley, some wheat flour. Bacon is the main stuffing, and then it is served typically with, usually they'll serve it with lingonberry preserves, but here in Germany the closest thing I can get are Preiselbeeren preserves. Preiselbeeren are very similar to lingonberry, but the bush is a little different. These are much closer to the ground, the berries are bigger, but they have a very similar flavor, so they'll work. And then typically we'll put a little butter on the side, and we may salt the water a bit before we cook it. So next up, what we're going to do is we're going to peel these potatoes. Now typically people want to use old potatoes, but these are going to be a pain to grate. So I only used half of them from this, and I used a larger starchy potato for the other half. So this should be fine. At any rate, let's go ahead and get started. First thing we're going to do is we're going to take the eyes off the potatoes, obviously, and then I'm going to peel the potatoes and stick them in cold water while I wait to grate them. Then I will grate them finely and again squeeze the liquid out like I would if I were making Zeppelini. So let's go ahead and get started. So before we start grating the potatoes, because this needs to start to move relatively fast, we're going to set everything up. We have our grater, and again we're going to use this fine side here, and we're just going to run the potatoes through this as fast as we can to turn them into something like applesauce. We have a strainer, which we will use to drain off as much of the liquid as we can. Unlike Zeppelini, we don't have to squeeze this until it's super dry. I've already cut my bacon lardons into small cubes. And from here, basically this will be our filling. And I have the potatoes peeled and underwater. Now, my Swedish friends tell me you don't have to worry about vitamin C too much. However, because this is my first time and since I'm recording, I'm going to grate maybe a third of this onion before I start the potatoes. That's a completely optional step. Once you're experienced, you can omit it. But the onion will also help them keep looking lighter for a lot longer, maybe even let you reheat them later afterwards. So we're just going to take this, grate a bunch of this here, and the reason for the onion here is it just adds some vitamin C, both to the mash and to the dough. If you just care about the mash, you can go ahead and just use like a squeeze of lemon juice, but again, even that's optional. Onion, however, is less likely to affect the flavor in significant ways, believe it or not. So that's all I'm going to grate here. As I say, not a whole lot, just a bit for some vitamin C. Then I'm going to start my potatoes, and I'm just going to grate them here as fast as I can. And basically this will just take me a little bit of time, and I will be back when I am done grating my potatoes. So now these are oxidizing just a little bit, but I think it should be okay. We're going to go ahead and pour this into a sieve, and basically the goal, oh crap, sorry about that, I have to pour this back through. The goal is to get as much liquid as we can out with the sieve. So we're going to basically, you've seen me do this with courgettes, but basically it's the same principle. We want to get as much of the water out of this, but we don't need it to be like dry pulp that we would typically use with zeppelini. So I'm going to come back in just a few moments, and then we'll go ahead and mix up this. So I'm lightly pressing the pulp against the strainer. You can see we get a little more water out. And you can see we end up with something that's pretty firm. And we're going to set this aside now. Now it's time to make up the dough. I'm just going to wash off my hands before we come back to do that. So I'm starting by mixing in 100 milliliters of flour. Ideally you should use a mixture of barley and wheat flour. And then from here I'm just going to start spooning flour in until I get the dough consistency I want. The exact amount of flour that will have to be used is going to vary from batch to batch based upon a number of factors, including how old the potatoes are, how starchy the potatoes are, how watery the stuff that you get at the end is. But we should end up eventually with a fairly firm. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide this into 6 balls, and I'm going to stuff them, and then we'll go ahead and get started with boiling them. So I've already made 2 others, so I'm going to show you how these are made. I just take about a 1/6 of the dough. I'm going to basically make a depression in the middle. Take about a 1/6 of my cubed bacon. Put it in the middle, and then kind of stretch and fold around. And then we'll have one of these pitapalt ready to eat. Not ready to eat, ready to cook. Now these are going to boil for nearly an hour, so we need to make sure they're very nicely sealed. And so yeah, like this one's having a little bit of trouble right there. So I'm going to take a little bit of dough from the areas that are really thick, move it to the areas that are really thin, and okay, I think I just messed that up again a little bit. Just a little bit more dough, put it over the top, and I think that should be good. And I'll be back when we're all done. And so here we have 6 of these pitapalt ready to cook. As one really important note, just like zeppelini, it really helps to have your hands wet while you're working with the dough. If the dough is sticking to your hands, just get them wet. And but we want them to be roughly ball-shaped. And then we will put them in the water. And then we will boil them. So the water is boiling, and so I'm adding the pitapalt. You can use a slotted spoon or a spider. I'm using a spider. You really can't cook more than, I think, 6 of them in a pot this size at once. You might be able to do 8, I don't know. But now these are going to boil for 45 minutes. And then we'll be back to actually plate and eat. Oh, and one more thing. It's really important to loosen them from the bottom after they've been in the water for like a couple minutes. Otherwise they will stick and they will burn. There we go. See everyone in about 45 minutes. And so now it's been 45 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and start my plating. I'm actually going to start with the Preiselbeer bottom because I'm going to put the Pitepalt on top of the Preiselbeer, and then I will top it with a piece of lovage just because it'll look nice. So here's what they look like when they're done. Number 2. And number 3. This one did not quite seal, so I'm going to set that one back. This one looks good. And basically, I'm going to slide them onto the plate so that the Preiselbeer is on the outside. And then I'm going to put this in the middle. The other thing that this is usually topped with is butter. So I'm actually just going to put a small piece of butter on top of each of these. With the idea that it will eventually melt and slide off, but that's okay. We mostly want the melted butter anyway. We could in fact just place the butter kind of in the sides here or even on the edges. Doesn't really matter that much. And then here we go. So here is the Pitepalt. And now for the taste test. So this is a bit firmer than many of the dumplings that I've had before, but it should still be in the same area roughly. This is actually really good. It has kind of a smoky bacon flavor, and the lingonberry / Preiselbeer just kind of accentuates that quite a lot. And the melted butter, really good along with it. This is definitely a dish that I will make again, probably many times. It's absolutely delicious. Now, if you find this content interesting and helpful, I hope I've earned a subscription from you. Please click the notification bell so that you can get notified when I release a new video. Additionally, I look at 3 things when deciding what to do more of. The first are comments, or people in cases like this reaching out to me directly, as well as views. So if you share or simply like the video, that helps. I also do look at likes. So you can participate in what I should make a video of next. I'd like to also make a real special thank you to Robert Vitala for recommending this particular dish and for providing some information when I had questions about how to make it. As always, the recipe's in the description. Bon appetit, and see you next week.